Dr. Gorka, I know in your previous Newsnight encounters we have spent a lot of time analysing whether Newsnight itself is fake news, etc. So just for the sake of our viewers and for the sake of moving the story on, why don't we agree to recognise that that's how you view things, and this time just shed a little bit more light on how you see operations in the White House. It's very good of you to join us. Was there anything in the coverage of Michael Wolff's book that struck a chord with you, that you recognised?
Nothing at all, especially if you look at the basic facts he gets completely wrong. In the excerpts that have already been published, he can't even get right whether the president knew John Boehner. He says on the day that he became president, he'd never heard of the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, when any child can go on Google and put in the name Donald Trump and John Boehner and find photographs of those two men golfing with each other 2 years ago. If you look at the book, I haven't spent money on it, but the introduction, page 10, Michael Wolff states he cannot verify any of the information he's providing in the book, and as such, it's a work of fiction.
I'm looking at that now. What he actually says is many of the accounts of what has happened are in conflict with one another, many in Trumpian fashion, baldly untrue. It sounds as if he heard a lot of conflicting accounts, he wrote them up, he let readers decide what to think, and the accounts that came from multiple sources he wrote up as factual. That is what journalists do.
No, it's not what journalists do. Journalists verify their sources. If you ran a story that was conflictual and just said, I'm going to allow the BBC viewers to decide which version is reality, you'd be warned or you'd be fired. A journalist has to have at least 2 verified sources for every story. Michael Wolff is a charlatan and he's a liar, and his introduction tells you as much.
And yet, curiously, he paints a picture that a lot of other commentators have also recognised. He paints, for example, a picture of a president who sounds like he's slightly lost his mind, who behaves in an impetuous, erratic, a childlike way. Do you recognise that at all in the president?
He repeats the calumny of all the febrile left-wing, Trump derangement syndrome suffering progressives out there, and so I don't recognise any of it.
OK, so you don't recognise, for example...
I actually worked in the White House, OK? I'm not a political hack who came in to write a book to make a lot of money and to please the elite that failed both nations that we're talking about, whether it's the UK or the United States. Donald Trump won in the same reason, on the basis of the same facts, that Brexit won in the UK and wasn't predicted by the elite. So, look, this is a joke.
OK, as an insider, just paint a picture for us of what you know to be true then. For example, I think we're told, you know, some of the observations in the book say most days Trump preferred to be in bed at 6:30 p.m, watching his televisions, eating cheeseburgers, making calls to friends in confidence. That's wrong.
It's such garbage.
What
I mean,
time
literally
does he go to bed?
Garbage.
Just give us a sense, then.
This is a man who sleeps less than 2.5 hours a day. OK, that's the fact. When he's tweeting at 4 a.m., nobody's tweeting for him. That's the President of the United States. Let's just forget the palace intrigue, Emily. Forget the palace intrigue. Look at the last 11 months. What has this president done? He's revitalized NATO. We've had the 71st record-breaking stock market rally, a 78% drop in illegal immigration across the southern border. ISIS destroyed. The South Asia trip, revitalizing our relations. 1.5 million jobs created, the lowest unemployment in 17 years. Judge the president on the facts on the ground, not on delusional people who want to sell books.
Just help us, though, with some of the details, because it is fascinating. People will read it. For example, Trump's rules: no one touched his toothbrush. He liked McDonald's because it was pre-made and he knew he couldn't be poisoned. Are you serious?
Is that news? Somebody's tooth-brushing habits?
Just tell us that you know that's not true.
Let's be serious.
Is none of that true?
I'm not going to waste the viewers' time with this rubbish.
OK, so it might be true.
Let's talk about your toothbrushing. How do you brush your teeth?
Do you know
That's news, right?
The interesting thing is, it's the details.
Do you floss? Emily, do you floss?
It's the details, isn't it, that allow people to know whether the rest of it is true. Let me quote to you something about Sean Spicer repeating the daily mantra, "You can't make this, excuse me, shit up." Or Kellyanne Conway, who, according to Wolff, mimed putting a finger gun to her head when she privately quoted the president. Why would you make up gestures or make up words? Could they be true?
In one of his recent books, 13 people demanded that he retract the quotes that he attributed to them because they were fictional, they were made up. His book is the equivalent of Harry Potter.
He's never been told to issue a correction.
I have no idea what he's been told because I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less whether people have demanded retractions. He's a hack.
OK, well, let's move away from the charlatan, as you call him, from the book itself.
Please,
even the quotes that Trump has put directly to the public through Twitter, for example, in the last week, taking credit for airline safety in the US for the last 7 years, or asking, I think last week, for good old global warming, his words, boasting about the size of his nuclear button. It's that kind of language, isn't it, that makes it really easy for people to believe what they're now reading.
No, that's the language that makes it really easy for a rank outsider to decimate a field of 16 elite members of the GOP and then wipe the floor with a woman who spent more than $1 billion on a position she thought was owed to her because of her gender. No, this is why the president is the president, because of what he does on Twitter and because he connects with the average man and woman who has been ill-served by the elite on both the left and the right for more than 20 years.
Lots of people.
God bless the president and his Twitter feed.
And lots of people, as you know, are saying that it's painting a very accurate picture, one that other reporters have already written about.
That's a very scientific term, lots and lots. No, show me the statistics. Well, lots and lots of people at the BBC or CNN, irrelevant.
What about Janice Min? We're speaking to her in a moment. She was at the table. She was at the Roger Ailes Bannon dinner. She's verified pretty much everything she read in that book.
Let her talk for herself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gorka.
Thank you.
And so we will. Sebastian Gorka was speaking to me a little earlier. Michael Wolff said today that he stands by everything reported in the book. We asked him for an interview. He wasn't available today. But Janice Min, who you just heard about, is part owner of The Hollywood Reporter and was invited to the dinner party attended by Steve Bannon and Roger Ailes that is recounted clearly in the book. And she joins me now from LA. Janice Min, thanks very much for joining us. Just tell us what went on that night. You were one of a very small select group, just 6 guests at that dinner with Roger Ailes, Steve Bannon. It's recounted in the book. What do you remember of it?
I remember almost every detail. This was a small party, as you said, of 6 guests. It was at Michael Wolff's house. And, you know, listening to Dr. Gorka before, I think the position from Trump loyalists is that Michael Wolff is an outsider. It's just, from my experience with Michael, I don't see that. He was such an intimate and so warmly received by Steve Bannon and Roger Ailes, and also Roger Ailes' wife, and had such a level of trust and intimacy with them that the conversation we had that night was stunning. It was the things from start to finish. It went for 5 hours that he said. They poured their hearts out about the Republican Party here, who they were going to put in the cabinet. Roger Ailes offered to coach candidates who are putting forth to be cabinet members in their congressional testimony. They talked about Rudy Giuliani, who wanted to be the Secretary of State and was disappointed he hadn't gotten the position. Steve Bannon said they really owed Rudy something because Rudy had come out forcefully. He went out and spoke on the Sunday morning shows here in the United States when no one else would after the Access Hollywood tapes. They owed him something, and Roger Ailes was very Roger Ailes, and he said, you know what you do? Just let him be photographed walking once or twice out of Air Force One, the president's plane, and he'll be fine. I mean, so after that, just detail after detail, where they spoke so comfortably and openly in front of Michael. To any way characterize him, you can try to dispute the facts, which I think is not. But you cannot dispute the relationship he had with people in the White House.
Janice, let me just ask you, at that dinner, did it seem as if Steve Bannon was in the driving point? This was just 2 months after the election. You had the Fox News executive, Roger Ailes. Were they still in shock that he had won? What was the sense that you got?
No, you know, I think Roger Ailes might have been in a bit of shock. He had said to me, he was sitting to my right at dinner. He said, you know, these guys, they're even a little, you know, right my tastes, and I'm a diehard or lifelong Republican, and so I think he was a little bit surprised. But Bannon came in. You know, he is full steam ahead. He was invigorated. I think this whole notion we have of him that he is foaming at the mouth, crazy. And let's remember, he had given an interview to Michael Wolff that made quite a bit of news a few months before this dinner, where he said, "I'm Darth Vader, I'm Satan." Like he embraces this role as sort of this dark force. He came in, was in a great mood, immediately sat down. I think one of the first things he said was, we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem in Israel, and they had a discussion about that. Then they started ticking off cabinet appointments, Supreme Court appointments. I mean, he was. So I would characterize it as this: his relationship with the president was that he was the take charge guy, and that there were things he said that made me divine that he necessarily didn't think Donald Trump was going to dwell in the details, but he was entrusting Steve Bannon to execute on an agenda.
Let me just bring you to today now. A lot of what Wolff recounts suggests a man in the White House who is not really in control of his faculties, who is impetuous, who is perhaps losing his mind, who has not had the trust of many of his advisors and staffers there. Is that something that you see and recognise, or is this Wolff going too far, just writing down conversations without verification, as Sebastian Gorka just said?
I think, let's remember, Michael Wolff, for starters, I know Sarah Huckabee Sanders got up there and said they didn't know he was in there, he wasn't allowed. Whatever the actual scenario was, that the fact that let's say Donald Trump really didn't know, which I don't believe, that there was a reporter sitting in the West Wing for weeks and weeks and weeks without his knowledge. What does it say about the organization of the White House or of its press team? So I don't think there's any good answer that anyone can come up with why Michael Wolff was in there, except that he was allowed to be in there, which is now, in hindsight, embarrassing.
Just one last thought to you then.
Yes.
If this is read by critics of Trump, they will happily believe it because it feeds their narrative already. Yes. Will it make any difference to his base? And will this very public split with Steve Bannon, do you think, hurt Trump's electoral chances this coming year or even next time?
Oh my God! For starters, I think Bannon and Trump are they are a lovesick couple that go back and forth, back and forth. I do not think this is the end. I think it is such a mutually beneficial relationship. So I don't think this is the end of Trump and Bannon. I would be surprised. But there is such a narrative that has been constructed since Trump was running, since he was candidate Trump, that everything is fake. And there's an easy way to dismiss things you don't like, which is to say they're fake. So to think that Michael Wolff, in a book that has troubling details, would be treated any differently than any member of the press corps who has sat there and reported on Donald Trump for a year would be naive. So the fact that Michael Wolff released what I would liken to a bomb cyclone of news about Donald Trump just happens to make the heat on this particular book hotter than any story from the New York Times, from The Guardian, from whatever else has been out there covering Trump for all this time.
Janice, it's been great to have you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.